the mysterious and deadly Matthew Lloyd wants to know. It's been said that the only thing worse than facing your enemy is meeting your hero because it's virtually certain that they cannot live up to your expectations. Have you ever had that experience? How did it impact you? If the preceding premise is true, what is the role of heroes? Well, by happy coincidence, Matt, I was up in Idaho a couple of weeks ago, and I was asked to speak at a dinner for Republicans in Coeur d'Alene. And I was up there for the 5th or 6th time visiting my hero, one of the people I've admired since I can remember being old enough to look at airplanes, and that's Burt Rutan. I stayed at his house, and so did Natasha. And I've been up there many times with him. And every time I've had a chance to do a speaking event up there, Burt has been in the audience. I've been in the audience for a couple of his. I was in his audience at the Oshkosh Air Show 2 years ago, and he pulled me up on stage and had me say something, which was very nice of him. But Burt Rutan is my hero, and let me just I'll see if I can repeat this verbatim, because this is what I said just before I got into the speech. This is really what I said, believe it or not, because it's going to almost sound exactly like your question word for word. But I said, ladies and gentlemen, before we get started tonight, I just want to say one thing. You know, it's extremely rare for anyone to have the opportunity to actually meet one of their heroes. And it's even more rare for you to be able to have spent enough time with one of your heroes, like Burt Rutan is for me, and get to know them really well. And even more scarce than that is meeting a hero, spending time with a hero, and then realizing after knowing them well that you are not disappointed in them once you get to know their actual character. And Burt, I just want to say, you know, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And Burt just kicked his head back and laughed, and everybody else laughed, and people laughed because they knew what I was saying. And so the answer is, it is indeed possible. It's possible to meet heroes. I've had a chance to become friends with people like Gary Sinise and John Voight and a number of other people, and they've always been as good as or better than I hoped that they would be. Again, I don't know if that is a conservative liberal thing. I have heard anecdotally that people like, this is probably not a fair criticism. I was going to say people like Bill Maher and other people on the left, when they do a speaking event, the second it's over, they're helicoptered out of there because they don't have to mix with the hoi polloi. But I understand that that's probably true for guys like Mark Stein and Rush Limbaugh as well. I don't see Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck work in the room afterwards. I do. I do because it's my favorite part of the night for a number of reasons. Meeting people is tremendous. This is where I learned everything I learned, basically. I always learn something. Almost always meet somebody who's either from the Stratosphere Lounge or somebody goes back to the eject days or member or something like that. And it's the high point of my night and the high point of my trip. So, yeah. So the answer to your question is, yes, I have met a hero, and I have gotten to know a hero, and I have not only not been disappointed in my hero, but I've been impressed. Now, there are little things, little idiosyncrasies, and by the way, when I told Burt Rutan this many visits previously, he said, I feel the same way about you, and that was enough to just, you could knock me over with a feather after that. What's the role of heroes? Sorry about the vision. Bone Canoe 86, who I pronounced correctly this time, says, what do you think about the fact that there's a number of young people who see you as their hero? And my first response is to say, boy, we're getting pretty scarce in the hero department out there if I'm somebody's hero. And I mean this sincerely. I know it sounds like false modesty, but I'm very serious. We had grown up on actual heroes, you know. If I had to pick one person who was alive at the same time as me who I would like to have met and didn't, It would have been Neil Armstrong by a wide margin, I think. And Neil Armstrong was a great hero of mine. But there are no Neil Armstrongs anymore that I'm aware of. I've met some superb test pilots, and I've met people who are made out of the same stuff as Neil Armstrong. But there was something about that man's character. I mean, he and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon at exactly the same time, right? I mean, they landed on the moon simultaneously. And the way that Neil acted after the moon landing and the way that Buzz acted after the moon landing is virtually opposite each other. They're very close to being directly opposite reactions. Neil became extremely private, very, very private, very secluded, taught engineering at, I want to say at Purdue, I think. And Buzz got into some real trouble with drinking and stuff. And, you know, and I know the show meanders because that's why we do the show, is for the meandering. But the thing about Buzz that I've heard anecdotally, Buzz is not a nice guy. Buzz is not the kind of guy where I know people who've known him. I've never met him. I actually shook his hand once, but I've never met him. But Buzz is not a nice guy. Neither was Chuck Yeager, by the way. And they were the same kind of not nice guys. But I have heard anecdotally that Aldrin, when he came back from the moon, he heard essentially his father said to Buzz, second, you couldn't have been first. You know, what do you say about that? And I remember hearing about Buzz having problems when I was very young, when I was 13, 14, 15 years old. And somebody explained to me, this was right when it was just, 1973, 74, so 4 or 5 years after the moon landing. And when I said that I heard that Buzz was having problems, and I said, why? The guy's one of the most famous guys in the world. He's accomplished this unbelievable thing. And my friend at the planetarium said, Bill, imagine what your life would be like if you're 30 years old and you walked on the moon. And this was all you ever wanted to do in your life, but you've done it. You walked on the moon. Where do you go from there? What do you do with the rest of your life? You've got another 60 years ahead of you. What's going to compare to that? And even as a young person, I realized that's actually a pretty heavy burden to bear. It's kind of like being the football hero in your high school who scores the winning touchdown in the last second of the state championship and has to go through the curse of living a life where the high point of his life was 17 and downhill ever since then. So the purpose of heroes is they make you. There is a built-in human, almost an instinct. It's not an instinct because an instinct is a set of behaviors, but it's a very strong built-in human survival technique to revere leaders. And this can be good and it can be bad. When you force people to revere leaders and you indoctrinate them, like with Stalin or Hitler or Mao or now Kim, you can use that mechanism in people to turn them into, death bots. So when people say some people are my hero, I am left with first of all, an enormous sense of humility and gratitude. But I'm also left with the sense that what I said originally may sound funny and may sound like false humility, but is actually true. If I'm somebody's hero, then we are having a pretty significant hero crisis in this country. I'm very proud of the work I do, and I'm very fond of it, and I'm extremely grateful for the people that allow me to do it. And I have always been good at and always enjoyed teaching people things, explaining things to people. If it turns out that the landscape out there is so barren that this is a source of real, genuine hero inspiration, then I'm deeply honored, deeply grateful, and wondering why there's not an awful lot more of it around, because you're not looking at Audie Murphy here or Neil Armstrong for that matter, or Thomas Sowell or anybody like that, just pretty much a regular guy who got tired of hearing all of these slanders and lies and just started to think seriously about things I hadn't really thought about before. But in any event, again, I'm very grateful, and it's very flattering. And I will say one more thing. It is unbelievable, and that's a word bandied around by everybody. Me certainly as much as often rather as anybody else. Unbelievable. It was amazing. It was unbelievable, but it's unbelievable to me. Natasha and I went out to Santa Barbara to celebrate having met 1 year before. And as we were leaving the office, somebody in the elevator in the office who I didn't know, as she was getting off the elevator, said, "Keep it up, Bill. You do really good work." And it was unbelievable to me. And likewise, when we stopped on the way at Chick-fil-A, go Chick-fil-A, somebody else said, "Are you Bill Whittle?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Can I get a picture?" I said, "Absolutely." And I never get over it. I never get over it. I don't want to get over it. It's astonishing to me. It really, truly is. It's astonishing. When people will say, it's the famous Bill Whittle or this and that, it really is astonishing to me. People that have met me know I'm enormously more unpleasant and taller than I am on television. But I've spent some time with Matt Lloyd online, and I've spent some time online and face-to-face with Foghorn there at Viper Check. And so when Foghorn basically said, "Come on down to Tampa and we'll put you in a room full of other fighter pilots, we'll give you a call sign," they were my heroes. Those guys were my actual heroes. And I felt that kind of reverence, which is why the second that I realized that this was not going to be a two-way street of banter, I simply just shut up and did everything I possibly could in order to salvage what was left of my meager reputation and try to earn some fragment of respect of people who I wanted to be. I wanted to be these guys my whole life, and they're out there actually doing it. And as I said before that ceremony, we did some flying. We did formation flying in turbulent weather under very cloudy thunderstorm skies, and I'm just up there in the front seat of a I want to say it was a Legacy the first time, Lancer Legacy, and I look off to the right. Oh, look, there's an RV, and it's this far away from our wingtip, and bumpy air and the perfect formation. Foghorn was teaching Matt and I how to fly formation. I already knew how to fly formation, but we have to humor Foghorn on account of how he's not in the Air Force anymore and he doesn't have anybody to boss around. No, but he's giving us instruction in real time over the internet, and this is this is mother's milk to me. This is it's like I can't get enough of it. I love it, absolutely love it, and that's going to be one of the things that going to make our Star Citizen venture interesting, if nothing else, and that is that we are going to be able to train people in the game by people who do this in the real world professionally. I think that's a neat thing. Talk about absence of teachers and heroes and stuff like that. I think it'd be great to have actual fighter pilots teaching some young game players formation flying. And the reason I think, and this is the reason why I'm so psyched about the Star Citizen thing. Let's say we find, and this goes directly to your question, indirectly. Let's say that we find 5 teenagers or people in their early 20s, probably going to be all boys, and they decide that they want to, sign up and learn formation flying. How is that politically interesting? What does that do? Well, in a very simple sense, in a very basic sense, it is discipline. It's discipline. Teamwork has been shoved down their throats their entire lives, these millennials. And in fact, it's been so shoved down their throats that most of them don't know how to act on their own. They don't. It's not that they lack initiative; it's that they don't know what initiative is. But if you're going to do something like this and you're going to take it seriously, then you basically have to. You have to subsume your ego. And this was a point I made on my right angle, which has not come out yet. It'll come out in a day or two or so. I was talking about this college in Georgia, University of Georgia, home of the filthy effing Bulldogs. And one of the professors at the school has decided that he's going to give out grades, but if students find the grade to be too stressful, then they will be able to change the grade to whatever grade they see fit with his full approval. And that led into some interesting discussions. And here's what I think is interesting about the discussions, basically just parroting what I said on Right Angle, but at least I get to parrot myself. His attitude, and the attitude of all of the progressives out there and all the people who are doing the teaching these days, is essentially this. You must be gentle, and by the way, because he said, oh, and furthermore in our class, there will be no more negative comments of any kind in the class. If your work, for whatever reason, is unsatisfactory, or if there's something missing, I will email you in private, but I will not say anything negative about anybody in the class. And this professor believes, as the rest of the left believes, that by doing this, you are preserving this individual's self-esteem because you are not denigrating them in front of the class. You're not embarrassing them and humiliating them in front of the class. Therefore, they're going to have self-esteem, and therefore they're all going to be friends. But we find that that's not true at all. The reason there's such rabid social justice warriors is because they have no self-esteem. I'm going to do a firewall on this subject, or did a survey just recently that found out that aggressive virtue signaling is in fact a result of people having very, very little moral sense of their own, and they feel like they have to pump up something, so they pump up this, outrage about, Palestinian, whatever the case may be. So their theory is wrong, but the question then is, how can we prove that? Well, thinking in real time, I thought I disagree with this professor's model of humans. The professor who said that we're going to let students pick their own grade in order to preserve their self-esteem and help them become better people. I disagree with his premise. So what can I offer in evidence to support a different viewpoint? And what I came up with was SEAL training, SEAL team training, BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition School. If you've ever watched SEALs in training, if you've ever seen a movie about Marine drill instructors, if you've ever been in the military at all, you will probably perceive by this point that a drill instructor is not particularly shy about humiliating an individual in front of a group. And I was thinking this through as I was saying it. He is signaling out individuals for their failures, and he's not just pointing them out. He is shouting them at the top of his lungs and making the individual who's committed the infraction feel as small as possible. So why is it that if this humiliation is so bad for people, why is it that modern progressive students coming out of these kind of colleges where you get to pick your own grade are such helpless infants? And the people who come out of SEAL training are in fact the most capable, happy, confident, kind people that I've ever met. Why is it that humiliating somebody actually produces better people? What is it? I know it's true, I can see the outcome, but I didn't understand the mechanism. And it occurred to me that what happens in a case like that is, let's say somebody's being slow on a run, and this person is lagging behind, and this person is causing the entire company or platoon or whatever to slow down. And the drill instructor is running next to this guy and shouting at the top of his lungs. What's going on here? Well, there's a bunch of things going on here. The first thing that's going on here, believe it or not, is the fact that a young man in his 20s is being yelled at by a man in his 30s or maybe even 40s for not being able to keep up with him. What he's basically saying is, without saying a word, the drill instructor is saying, as a result of the work that I do in the training and being a Marine, let's just say Marines just for the sake of it, okay, because it's true for all branches, SEALs, Marines, whatever. When a drill instructor is basically running next to a guy who can't keep up and giving him living hell for being so slow and so lazy and so fat or so out of shape or whatever, the very first message that's being telegraphed is, this man is twice your age and he's able to run you into the ground. He's able to run you into the ground because he has trained to do it. And so there's kind of a sense of hope here, right? Well, this guy's twice my age, sometimes maybe 3 times my age, and he's able to run this course. So he's doing something I'm not doing. But the second thing that's going on is twofold, and one of them is obvious and the other one isn't. The obvious one is he's essentially trying to tear down that individual's identity, trying to tear down his individual ego so that he can then become part of a group in a way that you can't become part of a group if you maintain your individual ego. Returning to the story of my great day getting my call sign. That was the only experience I ever had with being in the military, by the way, those 2 hours, the only time I've ever been in the military. What I had thought, as I've said many times, I thought that going into this was that there's going to be a lot of, sarcasm and a lot of criticism and a lot of snark directed at me, and being fairly quick on my feet, I'd direct some snark back. And what I realized instantly was when they started saying, "What is it doing here? Why did you bring it to us?" I realized that this is not a two-way street. And the first thing it did, this humiliation, personal humiliation, the first thing it did was it got me out of that arrogant, smug position of, this is a kind of a thing between equals. They're fighter pilots and I'm an internet star, and we'll go down there and we'll have a little back and forth and it'll be kind of fun. No, you don't have to be here, Bill. You can drive and go away. No one's forcing you to be here. But if you're going to be here, we're going to make it pretty clear about who's in charge here and who doesn't even merit a name, who's not even a person. I don't even get a pronoun. I'm the indefinite article. I'm an it. I have to work hard enough and prove myself to these people before I can even become a he, before I can even become a person, let alone a fighter pilot, let alone a squadron mate. So all of that had to be broken down. And because I was primed for this, the process of breaking it down for me took about 3 seconds, maybe something like that. But it has to happen. And that's the obvious thing. So the individual has to be kind of subordinated to the group for the group to be able to function on a level, but something else is happening. And what else is happening is what's happening to the other people in the other recruits in the training platoon, let's say. So somebody's running slow and they're being chewed out, and everybody else is looking at this person, and the professor at Georgia will tell you that the person who's running slowly and being chewed out is being laughed at and mocked by the people who are not running slowly. But that's not the case at all. Certainly not the case as I would understand it, and as I've heard it told. On the contrary, when somebody is being chewed out for being the slowest person in the run, most people's reaction is, thank God, because it likely would have been me. I'm probably the second slowest person in the run. No one ever, I've never seen or anecdotally heard a case where somebody was laughing at somebody who was being chewed out for something, especially if it's a first-time mistake. They're not strong enough, they're not this enough. I've never heard of, and certainly not when you get to the level of buds, have I heard of anybody say, "Oh, that guy's a weakling, he's no. The reaction to this is, I'm glad it's not me. It could be me, and I'd better stay on my toes. And what that does is it puts people into a situation of sympathy with other people's weakness. And it's been my perception that drill instructors, and I never thought about this until 5 days ago, but drill instructors are not stingy when it comes to handing out abuse to people. And it never occurred to me until recently that they have to hand it out to everybody, that everybody has to be balled out. On some level, it has to happen, because everybody has to feel sympathy for everybody else. Everybody has to feel sympathy for the other person and put themselves in the other person's place and essentially say, hey, there but for the grace of God go I, getting this reaming because, I've done this before, I've stumbled here or whatever. And it puts everybody in a situation of sympathy and humility, and it bonds them together rather than splits them apart, as this self-esteem movement would tell you. And as I said on the show, and when I said this, Scott Ott, who can reliably be counted on to tear up at anything really remotely sentimental. And I said, my favorite thing about this dynamic is, especially when you're dealing with officers, buds, for example, my favorite thing about this is that when the class graduates, in the case of Officer Candidate School or something like that, when the class graduates, the drill instructor has to salute the people who he has been basically demeaning and humiliating for the last several months. He has to salute them. They've gotten through the course, they're now officers or whatever the case may be, and they outrank him. And that is a beautiful thing. But even if they don't have to salute the sergeant, because it's usually a sergeant, almost always a sergeant, even if the sergeant doesn't have to salute the recruits, when the recruits pass, those that don't wash out, when the recruits pass, the demeanor of that drill instructor not only changes, it inverts. And what used to be a person who was impossible to please, who you spend every waking hour just trying to predict how to make this guy happy, only to avoid the punishment, not because you had any affection for the guy. All of a sudden, this person who's never really shown you any respect, as a matter of fact, pointed out every weakness that you've ever had, all of a sudden, this person shakes your hand and looks you in the eye and says, congratulations, and essentially says, welcome to the club. And that's the transformational moment. That's the transformational moment. It certainly was for me, because I went in with this ego, and that ego and arrogance was beaten out of me very early in the evening. And I spent the rest of the evening trying to earn the respect and the gratitude of the respect, not gratitude, just trying to earn the fundamental respect of these guys. And I was 100% sure I wasn't going to get it. 100% sure that I just made a complete and total ass out of myself, and that it was a gigantic humiliation for me. And so when they finally inked me up with the name on that T-shirt, and all of these guys who had been doing a very efficient job of making me feel like zero for the last 2 hours, lower than zero, when all of a sudden these guys start shaking your hand and patting you on the back and saying you did a good job, even not only for a civilian, you did a good job for an Air Force recruit, and they start calling you brother and things, it's transformational. It rewires your soul. It burns out a lot of impurities. It does something grand, because even though the 2 hours was a very small trial in terms of the bigness of things, I had, to some degree, I'd not earned the uniform, because I don't have to put my life at risk, and they do. But I had earned, I think, the respect, because I had spent so much time in it, and I had put so much effort into the same thing as them. And I'll just close this story by saying what I've said every time I tell this story. When we got there a little late. There were so many thunderstorms at Tampa that the ramp was shut down. I had to sit in the airplane for 45 minutes. It was starting to get dark. And after I went to the Foghorn picked me up, and after we went to the liquor store to buy my nearly $500 worth of bribes for these people so they don't end up with Bambi or gay porn or something as a call sign, we get to the airport, and these guys are very taciturn, and they're not like show business people. Oh, hi! No, not at all. They said, yeah, I thought maybe we just take the planes out and fly around the flagpole a little bit, just show you the airport and surrounding airspace. And I had this moment in my head. I've told the story 100 times. If you've heard it before, you just have to hear it again. It was one of those moments where something breaks through your consciousness with such clarity. It is like they said in Apocalypse Now. It's like I got shot between the eyes with a diamond bullet. And here was the experience. I'm watching these guys pulling out these little airplanes. I grew up in Florida. I haven't been there for many years, but I grew up in Florida, so I know what a Florida thunderstorm is looking like. And I looked out along the line of these hangars, and I saw a big thunderstorm moving in. And I saw these Air Force pilots looking at that and thinking, it doesn't look too bad. And then somebody said, it's that one, the one that we're worried about. And I take 2 steps back, and I look 90 degrees to the right, and there's an even bigger thunderstorm, even closer coming in. And these were the thoughts that I had, like a diamond bullet, just like this, just exactly like this, verbatim, with this emotional response. Believe me, don't believe me, I don't care. I thought, I don't want to fly in this weather. I don't think it's safe to fly in this weather. That was my first thought. And following it on its heels instantly was the thought that, but I'd rather be killed in an airplane crash than tell these guys that I'm not going to fly in this weather. I would much rather be killed in an airplane crash than say, I don't know, it just seems a little iffy. Don't you think the clouds are a bit iffy? Don't you think maybe because, look, these people are professional combat pilots. This was the third thought that entered my head. These people are professional combat pilots, and they fly their airplanes here pretty much every day in this weather. And if they think it's safe to fly, that's good enough for me. And there was a time when we were coming out of a loop, because the airspace is limited to about 1,800 feet, I want to say, and you go any higher, you're in Tampa International's airspace. And so we're playing tag up there, and I'm flying with this guy, and he goes up high after a guy, and he flips over, inverts, does a split S out, and as we're upside down and we're coming out of a dive, and there was a period there that felt like a second or two. I bet it was 1/10 of a second. There was, as I'm looking at the water coming up like this, there was a moment when I said, I don't think we're going to get out of this loop. I don't think we're going to get out of it. And I was perfectly fine with that. I really, truly was. I was perfectly fine with that. I thought, well, that's, if you're going to go, that's how I'd like to go. So the self-esteem movement is the greatest catastrophe to befall America since Marx was born. It has got everything exactly backwards, and it is the product of people who are raised as cowards, and I don't mean that in a malicious way. I mean it in a very precise clinical way. It's the philosophy of cowards and losers imposed upon other people. And I don't believe that there are such things as inherent cowards or losers. I believe that since cowards and losers came up with this philosophy, they're turning the entire generation of Americans into cowards and losers. And if they'd had different instruction, then they would have turned them all into heroes and winners. And I really believe that. I'm sure there's some bad eggs in there that wouldn't have made it, and in the same way that there are some good eggs that managed to escape the self-esteem movement, but it's been a catastrophe. And if you think it's bad now, just remember we're looking at the very beginning of a very big and wide bell curve, and it's going to get a lot worse. Hooray. Let's do maybe one or two more, no more than two. So Steve Darrell.